Well, welcome everyone to this special meeting of the Corte Madera Flood Board. We're here under less than ideal circumstances because we want to talk about the recent flooding around and just after New Year's. And the town convened this meeting so we can talk about the issues and the locations that were hit the worst and possibly look at some possible solutions for those areas. And then we'll talk about some long-range plans that are underway, and then finally open up the floor for hopefully a long question and answer and maybe a little bit of venting period. So without further ado, take it away, Adam.
There we go. All right. So thank you, Nathan. My name's Adam Wolf. I'm the town manager for the town of Corte Madera. I want to thank the Flood Board for convening this meeting short notice. This is a special meeting. I think it's really helpful to have you all in the room. Many of you are residents in flood-prone areas, including this neighborhood of Mariner Cove and Marina Village. But facilitating this meeting to have this conversation this evening. I also really want to thank, this is an incredible turnout tonight, so thank you all for being here. We really want to hear from you this evening. We have, I think, a good agenda tonight, but we want to make sure we get to your questions, your comments, and your input. Just by a show of hands, I'd love to see, part of what we're doing is still actually obtaining information about what happened. So I would love to see actually, if by a show of hands, how many people here are homeowners who had flood damage in the Bayside communities, by a show of hands. Anybody here from the Lucky area? Okay, we have some folks over here and over here, okay, as well. We're going to talk some about that. We'd love to get your input on that. But in some ways, this is a continuation of a conversation we've been having for many years with the Flood Board in the town about tidal flood risks and vulnerabilities in Corte Madera. What I'd like to do tonight, and I sort of view this as an opportunity for us to come together as a community, have a conversation. We want to discuss, and I think Nathan pointed out right, let's talk about the event that occurred in early January, the flooding. We have, and then talk about what actually happened, town's response, and preparedness in the future. What can we do better, right? And then there's also talking about longer term planning efforts, which we'd like to recap for a lot of you because this is not something that can be solved. I mean, I would love to come here and say that we could have protected you all from the tidal flooding. That's just not the reality at this point, right? But we can strategize about what we do in the long term for protecting these neighborhoods. And so we'll talk about that as well. And each one of those, we'd like to talk about the next steps that the town has either discussed already with respect to the longer term planning, and get your input about what we can do for flooding events that may occur again in the near future with respect to tidal flooding. And so with that, we have everybody in the room here. I want to acknowledge we have the right people in the room. Our flood board, this is a 40-plus-year-old board actually in the town who's been dealing with flood issues historically since the 80s. That's the reason why we have the Flood Advisory Board. They are experts in flooding. We also have Director of Public Works, Chris Good, who's got many years of experience in flood control, storm drain management. We have Amy Lyle as well, our Community Development Director, and Phoebe Golden, our Climate Action and Adaptation Coordinator for the town. And so you can see the town itself has invested a lot of energy and resources, staff time, into trying to address these issues over many years, and we'll continue to do so. We're going to have to. With that, I think I'll hand it back to Chris to start the presentation and get right into it. We'll talk about the event.
Thanks, Adam. I'm Chris Good, Director of Public Works. I'm going to be going through the flood recap, response, and recovery. And we'll try and kind of buzz through this so we have plenty of time for the listening session at the end and flood board to comment. So what caused the flooding? While we knew the king tides were expected at about 7.1 feet, there was additional factors, including low atmospheric pressure, storm surge, and strong winds, which resulted in record high tides that were about 1.5 feet higher than the predicted tides. The closest gauge to us is in Richmond, but at that tidal gauge, it almost exceeded the record for the SFA, which is 8.78. And the high tide that was, it's not verified yet, but it's currently 8.71 on Saturday. So just continuing, the National Weather Service issued a coastal flood warning on New Year's Day for potential 8.3-foot tides on Saturday. However, the tides ended up being even higher than they're predicted. While this king tide event and storm surge flooding was definitely very impactful, we just have to point out that there is potential for a larger flood in the future. Storm surge can be as high as 36 inches, in addition to the tidal water height in a 100-year flood. Wave run-up can increase the flooding by an additional 2 feet, and then rain during the king tide event could have also raised waters because the upland water coming down into the neighborhoods has nowhere to go and raises that tide. So in a sense, we got lucky that there was no rain during the high tide event on Saturday. And just also to mention, the base flood elevation set by FEMA is 10 feet in Corte Madera for a 100-year flood. So if you just imagine if that water level is another 2.3 feet higher in the neighborhoods, how much worse it could have been. So just going through the extent of flooding in Corte Madera, there was flooding occurring in Marina Village, Mariner Cove, on Paradise Drive, and then in the north part of town, Lucky, Pfeiffer, Nellen. So it's a bit hard to see, but this is basically where we observed flooding in Mariner Cove and Marina Village. And in Mariner Cove, the areas that flooded basically correspond perfectly to where we've done LiDAR maps and can see that the road elevations is a bit lower. So that, we'll show in a later slide, and you can kind of see it's pretty close there. Marina Village is at a much lower elevation, but has a berm around it. And unfortunately, the berm overtopped in 2 locations along Harbor Drive and Channel, which is what has been our main concern in our planning over the last few years. The only positive side was that the water drained into the detention basin we have to the north, and it was able to have enough capacity to absorb the water, and so it didn't flood the neighborhood until the tides went back down. So that's kind of just a brief picture of the east side of town. And I think we'll talk about this later, but we have a map over here. We'd love to hear people if you observed water, coming in between houses, or just report any damage that you experienced. This is on the north side of town, and obviously very rough drawing, but basically the dark blue area is where we experienced flooding in Corte Madera. Light blue is outside the town, but experienced the same flooding. Lucky Drive, Nellen, and Pfeiffer were all underwater, as well as the businesses and some apartments in that area. Also, our corporation yard flooded 4 days in a row due to the water on Lucky. And this area is a much more complicated issue because we had water coming in, underneath the apartments on Lucky, under the freeway, across the freeway in Larkspur. So this area is going to need to be a multi-jurisdictional effort to do some sort of flood berm around this entire area. So we've been working with Caltrans and Transportation Authority of Marin, and we'll continue to do so, but definitely this area is a bit more complicated to deal with the flooding. And just wanted to share one more map. This was prepared by Matthew Hartzell at WTV-TAM, but he kind of went around and observed where the water is coming in. And as you can see, it came in from multiple directions to flood the highway, Larkspur and Corte Madera. So just one more visual to see. And just wanted to share a few pictures. Left one is our corp yard. This was actually on Friday. On Saturday, we had another 18 inches of water inside, so did extensive damage in that building. The center picture is Channel Drive, and you can see, right behind the house, basically you're just looking at the bay, and it was just pouring through into the street. On the right, that's the other side of the berm next to our detention basin. That's actually where we were originally concerned about the water overtopping. But luckily, we had placed some sandbags there, and luckily the water just went right up to the top and didn't overtop that area. And then just two more pictures. Left is Pfeiffer Avenue. You can see Fitness SF there, and there was lots of water over the road there coming off the highway. And then on the right, that's the end of San Clemente Creek and Paradise Drive, and our little flood wall there was working, but the water still got around and ended up flooding the road a bit there. So just getting into our town's initial response, we have 2 sandbag filling stations at San Clemente Park and Town Hall, and our maintenance staff were running nonstop to bring sand in. We ended up delivering 35 tons of sand throughout the weekend, even though I know the sandbag filling stations would run out almost immediately just from all the needs. And we also brought in 2 pallets of sandbags on January 3rd to try and help out. Our public works staff were closing roads and helping fire and police and just dealing with traffic control through the events. The police department was sending out nixle alerts warning about road closures starting on Friday the 2nd. And our public works staff were also running around trying to keep our pump stations running because once the tides went down, we rely on our flood control system to basically drain all the water off the freeway and in Larkspur too. So they were helping with that. And then also cleaning after the flood. They were running the street sweepers nonstop for several days afterwards. And following the event, our town council declared a local emergency as of January 6, 2026, which potentially may help us get emergency funding for government property if the state decides to declare emergency as well. We're still waiting to determine that. Last few items, we delivered some debris boxes on Harbor Drive in San Clemente Park for flood damage materials for residents, and those are going to be out until this coming Monday, February 2nd. And our community development division has held a few pop-ups, and I think I'll let Amy talk to that in a moment. And then finally, our main focus has been restoration of the Public Works Corporation yard because our whole maintenance team works out of there, and it's currently extensive damage to the building and all the equipment inside. So just looking forward to preparedness, we've had a few discussions and came up with a few ideas so far just to try and make improvements for the future. Starting with just doing additional outreach in advance of extreme tides. This one caught us a little bit by surprise just because the predictions were lower than the end result. So I think we're going to come up with a threshold where basically we are going to just let the community know that there is potential flooding coming, and we may look at putting together some posters that we can put out in the neighborhoods or changeable message boards that alert people to coming high tides and flooding events. We'll continue coordinating with Marin Office of Emergency Management and Alert Marin, as well as Caltrans in advance of flood events, just to make sure everyone's on the same page and we're getting the word out early in case something like this happens again. Stockpiling more sand and sandbags in town. That was one issue we had. We didn't really have much stockpiled, so we definitely want to increase that for future floods. We want to modify our maintenance staff on-call procedures. Luckily we were able to get people in because this was like a holiday weekend, but in the future we want to make sure we have several staff members that can quickly respond in case of emergency like this. And then a few other quick ones was potentially looking at physical barriers to close roads during the flooding. And the last thing was not really an action for us, but just wanted to mention that we recommend homeowners in the flood zone avoid using mulch or landscaping materials that float. Obviously, you can see this photo that those materials end up in the road and in our storm drains and can block, the storm drains after the flood. So it's recommended to use landscaping stones or other materials that don't end up floating away. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Amy to discuss the flood damage estimate form.
Good evening, Community and Flood Board. I'm Amy, I'm the Community Development Director. That basically means that I manage the building division, planning division, and also do economic development. And I will say we have quite a cross-section of the town here. I know Adam wanted to note, council members, are you okay if I introduce them? So I know we have Mayor Thomas here, we have Vice Mayor Casisa, I think I saw him earlier, and then we have council members Andrews and Ravazio here. Are there any other board or commission members in the room? And then we also have Climate Action Committee members. I'll let Phoebe introduce those folks as we move on. And then I will say we also have Mike Moriarty, our Communications and Code Enforcement Manager in the back. And then we also have Scotty Morrill, our Building Inspector. So along with this workshop tonight, we do have some other interactive components. So over at this table here, we have a map, and it's an elevation map, and you can put a dot to just show where damage has occurred or where, as Chris noted, where you've seen impacts of the flood. And then we also have a survey for those that have had flood damage. We have a QR code so you can do it online, and then we also have paper copies if you'd like to fill that out. Next slide, please. And then along with the pre-planning and post-planning, we are also helping with just recovery efforts. So our building team has been doing pop-ups basically right here at the Cove parking lot near the dumpster. And we're going to be out there one more week, and if we have people needing more assistance, we'll keep coming out. But we wanted to make sure that we had a presence in the neighborhood. We haven't had anyone come visit us yet, but we've had a lot of good conversations at the dumpster and have had a lot of good visuals of what's going in the dumpster. But please use this as a resource. It's no fun to get building permits, but when you're looking at flood damage, it's really important to look at all those safety issues, get the permits. They're honestly really expensive. We can do them over the counter or even by email in some situations. So come to town hall, email us, call us, or come to these pop-ups, and we'll schedule more if we feel like we're needed in the community. We all collectively have a lot of experience with disaster recovery, and even Scotty himself has had some damage as a result of this event. So with that, I'll turn it over to Phoebe.
Thank you, Amy, and good evening, everyone. My name is Phoebe Golden. I'm the town's Climate Action and Adaptation Coordinator. And as we're introducing board members, I'll just point out we have one of our Climate Action Committee members here tonight, Phil Simon. I think that's the only one I saw, though we do have some former committee members joining as well, so thank you all for being here. We're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about some of the long-term planning efforts that the town has been pursuing to address flooding impacts, which are expected to increase in the future as subsidence of low-lying neighborhoods continues and as climate change continues to impact our weather patterns and sea level. So as mentioned, flooding is a risk that the town has been working to mitigate for some time. As already mentioned, we have this flood board, which was established in response to some major flooding events in 1982 and 1998, and provides this forum for public input on flood control in the town. And the town's also developed several storm drain master plans. Most recently was updated in 2024, and those look at managing stormwater runoff, so inland flooding. And then looking at the Bayside flood risks, in 2017, the town completed a Marina Village levee study, which was a preliminary look at one of our key pieces of flood infrastructure in the town that we'll be talking about more tonight. Also in 2017, we had the first countywide sea level rise vulnerability assessment, which was called Baywave, and included a profile of Corte Madera and our vulnerability to sea level rise. We built on that work with our Corte Madera climate adaptation assessment, which was completed in 2021 after about 2.5 years of research and engagement with the community. And if you participated in that development process, you might recall that the assessment was originally intended to be an adaptation plan and include sort of specific adaptation measures for all neighborhoods throughout Corte Madera. However, towards the end of that development process, there was a group of shoreline residents who became really concerned about some of the measures that were included for their neighborhoods. And due to that pushback, the town ended up removing all of the adaptation measures for Marina Village and Mariner Cove. And instead, the assessment identified as a next step to re-engage with those communities and sort of restart the conversation. And that led us to launch the shoreline adaptation engagement effort in the fall of 2023. Go to the next slide, please. That engagement effort focused on the area shown on the map here, which is roughly aligned with the FEMA 100-year floodplain in this area of town. And it was an 8-month effort with the goals of sharing information about current and future flood risks and possible adaptation measures, and really listening to the community to co-develop next steps.
I would just like to get another show of hands of how many people participated in the shoreline engagement effort. Okay, so several, that's great. Good to see.
Yeah, so as part of that effort, we had a series of events starting in fall 2023. We held small stakeholder conversations. We had conversations with the flood board. We held king tide pop-ups out in the neighborhoods. We held some virtual workshops to talk about the vulnerabilities specific to each neighborhood. And we also created a shoreline flood explorer video and online tool that was uses the USGS Cosmos model to projected flooding on 3D images of Corte Madera. And if you saw the video or explored the online tool, some of those images might have looked kind of familiar to what we saw earlier this month. The effort ended with a feedback form that was mailed to all 800 plus properties in the engagement area and was asking about flooding and overtopping concerns and support for various strategies to address flooding. Go to the next slide. So these are some of the themes that we heard throughout the shoreline adaptation engagement effort. We heard that many residents are already impacted and concerned about flooding. And we also heard a general level of support for addressing flooding issues, including by making it easier for residents to raise their homes in the flood zone, improving storm drain infrastructure, reinforcing the existing Marina Village flood berm, and building new flood protection infrastructure, including a potential, some type of flood barrier in Mariner Cove. And we carried forward all of this feedback into next steps that were presented to Town Council in October of 2024, and that we're still working towards today. And I'll turn it back over to Chris to talk more about those next steps.
Thanks, Phoebe. Okay, so jumping into next steps. So here's some proposed near-term priorities that were identified for the next 5 to 10 years. The main one is to initiate a project to fortify and raise the existing Marina Village flood berm, which that effort will include public outreach, preliminary design, and environmental review. And that was kind of the town's main focus for several reasons. I think we heard the most outreach for that neighborhood as far as concern about flooding. The other piece is that if that berm overtops, it won't only flood that neighborhood, but also will flood Paradise, potentially will reach the freeway and the malls. So it could be a pretty devastating impact if that levee or berm ever overtopped. So that's kind of our first priority. We'll also be implementing storm drain infrastructure priorities in the storm drain master plan. But I just want to mention that until there is some sort of flood barrier, the storm drain system doesn't really help much with flooding. The only thing that would really help with is after the tides go down, it would allow the water to drain out faster. So just wanted to mention that. We're exploring FEMA funding for raising homes, so we applied for a FEMA grant. We're preliminarily selected, but we haven't heard back about that yet. And in the current political scenario, it's looking less likely that will be awarded to the town. Moving on, so we're also going to identify priority areas in Mariner Cove to start preliminary engineering environmental constraints, and I'll point that out on the next slide. And then we'll continue to collaborate with regional agencies and organizations such as the county, Caltrans, BCDC, CDFW, and Marin Audubon on possible projects, including marsh preservation. And then finally, just continue to pursue potential funding opportunities. So this is a visual that kind of points out our first and second priority in the area. Obviously, first priority, as I mentioned, was the Marina Village berm, which circles that neighborhood and kind of goes up along Corte Madera Creek. And so the goal of that project would be to raise that berm and to add further protection to that neighborhood. And you can see the slide, like the area in blue is where there would be potential flooding if that berm overtopped and water was able to get across. So it would definitely cross the freeway and have a wide impact. The second priority is kind of on the east side of Mariner Cove, and it's along Golden Hind Passage where we have the very common impacts from just king tides. Generally, if the tide reaches around 7 feet, it will start going in between houses and flooding the road, as a lot of people have seen. So that would be kind of the first area that we would look at doing some sort of flood protection. Okay, and then just to go over completed and in-progress actions to reduce flooding impacts. We've looked at streamlining design review requirements for homeowners who wish to raise their homes, including changes related to lot coverage and location standards for decks on elevated homes in the flood zone. So that's already been done. We've added 200 additional sandbags to some low points in the Marina Village berm. I had a picture of that earlier, so that actually helped in this flooding event. And potentially we're hoping to do some more of that in the near future. As I mentioned, coordinating regionally with other jurisdictions and agencies to share information. We implemented or plan to implement storm drain master plan priorities and continue to apply for grants to initiate that priority one project in the Marina Village neighborhood. As I mentioned, in fall 2024, we were selected for a FEMA FMA grant, but there's still no word if that will ever be awarded. We're currently focusing more on state grants. We've applied for the Coastal Conservancy and are looking at the Ocean Protection Council, who both have grants available. But if all of these grant opportunities don't pan out, then we may need to look at other funding sources to pay for these pretty significant flood improvements. So that may be the next conversation, later this year. And then finally, I think I mentioned this briefly, but we do have some money programmed to begin doing a topographic survey of the existing berm and just trying to figure out where the weak points are. I think we saw that in this flood event, but it'll definitely help to know for sure where the low points are on the berm, going around the neighborhood. Okay, so that's the conclusion of our presentation. I'll pass it off to Adam.
Thanks. I think that was a broad overview. There's been a lot of action with respect to getting called to look into the camera, but I'd rather look at all of you. So I think that's a broad overview. Again, there's two areas that we're trying to get input, get feedback from you tonight. One is really talking about the event itself and how it affected you, what concerns, what needs you had that were either met by the town or could be met better next time. We've highlighted some of the things we've started thinking about. We'd like to hear if you think those are helpful, good ideas. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is put together like a playbook of how, if the tides get to certain levels, whether that's 7.5 feet, whether that's 8 feet, we start to put into effect an action plan, essentially, where we have increased staffing, we have the supplies ready, and to put those things out. That's the short term, right? The longer term you've seen here, some of the ideas, and we spent a lot of time and energy. I do want to acknowledge this has been a focus of the town for the last 5 years, with the support of the town council. Resources have been poured into really engaging our community. We felt after the climate adaptation assessment, it was really incumbent upon us to go back out and re-engage community members on what they saw as the solutions. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Nathan. I know the flood board has been living this with us for many years, and would love to hear if you have questions for staff. Again, I view this more as a community conversation, want to get input and feedback, and we can take this and really put some of these ideas into some next steps and concrete next steps, and come back to the flood board likely at an upcoming meeting and continue this conversation over the next several months.
That's great. Thanks, Adam, and to all the staff. I don't want to take any more time from all of you to get up here at the microphone. There's just two things I wanted to bring up based on what they said. One is that we have to think about solutions on two distinct timescales. They're talking about the timescale of how do we protect communities from the next high tide. Does anybody know when the next really big tide is? Well, really big, like closer to what we had, Christmas Day. So there's going to be another real king tide on Christmas Day that's quite a bit bigger than tomorrow's. The second is the long-term planning. I've been looking further afield on how other communities around the Bay are dealing with this issue. For better or for worse, we're not alone in this. Every low-lying Bay community, every low-lying community on Earth is dealing with this at the same time. So I just want to bring up two quick examples. One is the city of Foster City, south of San Francisco. They issued a $90 million bond just to the residents of Foster City to raise money for a 5.5-mile levee. So that works out to about $13 million a mile. So I just want to know that a levee that would protect a town for decades, anchor on that number, 13 million a mile. Santa Venetia, near the Civic Center, is looking at the Vendola Santa Venetia levee, which is about 2 miles long. Lo and behold, they're estimating 25 million, so $12.5 million per mile. So those are the kind of numbers we're looking at for a long-term solution that goes beyond this. So that's want everybody to think about the fact that we can't just decide to build a levee that's going to protect neighborhoods without making major financial planning that involves all the agencies discussed. And the second thing I wanted to mention is that for all of us to discuss, especially those long-term issues, we all need to be on the same page about tides and especially subsidence in these neighborhoods and understand what these elevations mean. As Chris alluded to, the maximum possible tide right now with a really high tide plus a storm on top of it is about 10 feet. And that would be a foot and a third higher than what we saw in January. A lot of people think that sea level rise is responsible for the flooding in this neighborhood, but sea level since this neighborhood was built has risen 6 inches. And this neighborhood at ebb tide in Golden Hind, for example, has sunk 4.2 feet since it was built. So this is really a subsidence issue, and these neighborhoods are going to continue to sink. That's actually a big part of the reason why New Orleans flooded during Katrina, because they did not plan for the subsidence of their levees. So I encourage people to look at the April 2025 video of the flood board meeting. We presented slides and about 15 minutes of description of sources of information for tides and subsidence, so we can all be on the same page when we're thinking, how high do protections need to be for tomorrow? How high do they need to be for 10, 20, 50 years from now?
I'm Sachi. I literally live at the end of the driveway. We were an island for, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours for about 4 days in a row, so I'm right in it with everybody. I think one misunderstanding that may have come about when the climate adaptation plan came out was this elevation 10 that Nathan mentioned. I think people heard, they may not have understood that that's elevation 10. Most of the roads around here are about 7, 7.5, so we're talking another 3 feet higher. And so I think when people heard that initially, they were thinking there's going to be a 10-foot berm in my backyard, and that was a lot of the backlash. So just understand that this elevation and the understanding of what is the current ground surface and how high we have to go, just, you know, there's a visualization that I want everybody to understand. It's not necessarily a 10-foot wall in your backyard. So, and yeah, I'm here, and I joined the flood board because we deliberately chose to purchase a home that we knew was in the flood zone because it's beautiful. And I love the neighborhood, I love the people, but you know, this is something that we as a community all have to kind of come together and deal with. So.
So with that, do we want to invite people up to the microphone to take some time?
Absolutely. Yes, please. Step up. You can.
And if anybody wants to speak next, you can go ahead and form a line.
How many individuals do we have, or how many folks do you think want to provide some feedback, input, comments? Okay, so yeah, I think we should have some. You want to queue up and have some limitation, perhaps, on time. Just try to keep it moving, I think is. Go ahead.
Okay. I moved into the home in Marina Village in 1962. I have been flooded 3 times in there. But before I go through anything, I want to thank everybody for the fabulous job. I did not get flooded this time, and I should have. I mean, by all that would be normal, right? So whatever the town did with their drainage and the new pumps and everything, kept that from happening, and I am so appreciative. You have no idea. Being old, I lost my train of thought. Okay. The water this time, and my understanding, a berm broke, and that's why the water came from north to south rather than normally. It threw me because I was standing at the window. I said, "The water's going in the wrong direction. What's the matter?" Because normally it would come from Paradise and flood. Now the water, I got water in my yards, all my yards. So I don't know if it's going to go on with the plants. But the water was what, David? This high? Yeah, at least 2.5, 3 feet high on my corner. So I don't know, and I don't know whether it's raising berms or doing more pumps. I don't know what the answer is going to be, but I'm looking forward to seeing. I know that that ground is really bad because now after the flood, my house is, it changes. It changes the house all the time. I always kid David, I said, I can tell when the tide's high because my garage is wet, So it's one of those kinds of things. But that's the other problem. And like somebody was saying about getting foundation help, I'd be interested in that.
What was that, foundation help?
Yeah, because my foundation is crumbling.
Okay.
And I think from the salt water and stuff that's been in it. I would
that's
be
helpful.
interested in that. Anyway.
If I can, Nathan, just respond on, I think Norma was talking about what did happen, and I was there, I know, behind about 4 houses on Harbor, I think from 19, 21, 23, and maybe 17. That is a known low point of the berm from San Clemente Creek. Based on if you look at actually the elevation models on our maps, that shows up as a low point. And in fact, that was overtopped during this event. And so that was a significant amount of water that was coming from those behind those homes, through those homes. And those were some of the houses that actually incurred the most damage because it actually went into the homes and not just the garages, and then out to the street. So you're right, it was coming from north of you and then to the south. And we also observed actually some of the water from San Clemente Creek going around the flood barrier right by Paradise, where the floodgate is, into Paradise, and then streaming to the west on Paradise until it dipped down into Harbor. So it was sort of like filling up the bathtub. And that's the thing with Marina Village, is that it's a very low elevation because of subsidence. It's sunk over time, and it almost has this bathtub effect.
The other thing I'd like to address, and it's the bark that's used in the. I was cleaning that out of the gutters because they do clog up. We have those little narrow gutters in front of the house and stuff, and they do clog that up. And leaves are the other big. So I'm going around the neighborhood with my rake and trying to get that stuff out. But I do think that maybe something should be done about having bark. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
First thing I'd like to do is to thank the board members for all the great work they've done over the years. I know they spent a lot of time and don't get as much credit as they deserve. My name is Chuck McDivitt. I live in Golden Hind. Been there for over 50 years. Been to a lot of flood control meetings. That's how we met most of our neighbors, going to flood control meetings. And of course, like we all know, nothing too much was done over the years. A lot of money spent on studies, engineering studies, and nothing was done. It seems like people are starting to get the idea that maybe things will start getting done now. My son's an engineer, and he worked on that Foster City project, and they seem very happy with that. It's worked out for him. It sounded like a lot of money. You didn't say how much each homeowner had to pay. I don't know what that was, but you did mention the total monthly fee, which is a little scary.
I'll just point out that they did an economic analysis, and it's a 30-year bond, and the homeowners are paying on that bond less than their flood insurance would have cost. So that's why they decided to do it.
I was here in '82 when we had the last flood like this, and it wasn't nearly as bad in my area as it was this time. I know Norma here said that she was very happy that, I remember Harbor Drive was flooded back then, and San Clemente was flooded, and we were just fine, but this time we were not. So you got all the benefit, Norma, this time, okay? So I hope you appreciate that. But we're hoping that, I was thinking that it seemed like a tidal gate is the answer to a lot of this. You're looking at the map up there, there's that one area that a tidal gate seemed like it would solve a lot of the problems, and then area to the south of that, then a wall all the way around there. But I'm sure everyone studied that as well. With AI today, you'd probably 5 minutes find out what a tidal gate would cost you. But it seems to me that would be the answer to a lot of the problems. And we're definitely sinking, and tides are getting higher, so we need to do something real quick. And 50 years ago, we thought maybe, well, 10, 20 years they'll have it taken care of, but that has not happened, and we're not in a better position today. But we do appreciate all you're doing, and I'm sure somewhere down the line that we'll get it resolved. Next case.
Hi, Ruth McCory. I also want to just thank you all very much for being proactive and reactive. Yeah, oh good. So I just want to thank you all for being reactive and proactive with the floods. I just want to make sure that in all the discussion of the floods in the Mariner Cove area, that the area by Barcelino's and Big Five Sporting Goods in Corte Madera was severely impacted by the floods as well, and actually our house was rendered uninhabitable. The floods up there were so severe that emergency vehicles couldn't get down the street. And so I just wanted to point out that the storm drains were very slow to empty even after the tide had receded. So I know you were a little dismissive of the storm drain issue, and it's really important. Just wanted to emphasize that. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just point out in bringing up that area that we need to coordinate not only with agencies like Caltrans, but also the city of Larkspur, because eventually I would imagine some sort of levy that would be required that was a joint effort between Corte Madera and Larkspur that extended from this area towards Corte Madera Creek. So we would need to do that to be protective of all those neighborhoods. Yeah. Yeah. County, state, cities, ferry, prisons, everybody.
I was only going to add the comment that was made about how deep the water is and with the emergency response. Being difficult for emergency response to get into that area. We have a very good emergency response group here in Mariner Cove. I was surprised that we weren't more active during these events for that very reason. Some people cannot get out of their houses for periods of 4 hours or more. And I think it would be helpful to have that group walking the streets and making sure people are okay if they can't get out of their house for any reason. It's just one of the things that we can do now that would help people out.
Hello, my name's Lauren Cosgrave. Norma, I'm your neighbor right across the street at 23 Harbor. So the water came from my backyard. Sorry. I also want to echo the thanks. Specifically, the dumpsters have been tremendously helpful. Thank you to the town for that. I also want to note that some of my neighbors noticed the tables. They said they wanted to stop by, so you may have been lonely, but people noticed, appreciated that you were there, wanted to come, but maybe didn't have the time. So it was appreciated and noted. I am a massive proponent, because it would directly impact my home on Harbor Drive, of priority 1 number here, the berm on Harbor Drive. Just want to give my approval of that. I'm interested also for all of the grant submissions. Looking at the timeline of when we've collected a lot of feedback from the community was prior to this event. And I know that when my husband and I bought our home in 2018, the story was, oh, this hasn't happened since 1982. And I imagine so much of that feedback would be different today, and that there is prime time to collect that feedback from the community. I appreciate this effort, but I also think if there's another effort to collect written responses or some type of electronic feedback, doing it now would be the most top of mind for most residents to be able to provide their direct feedback. And I'm also curious for the FEMA grants. I've done my own research on it, and I'm glad to hear that the town has petitioned for those grants. If I wasn't aware of that, I was going to submit a request to the town to do so. If there's any opportunity for residents to support the justification for those grants, more than willing to help participate, provide statements, documentation of damage. We have a national flood insurance policy that we are submitting through now to help build that justification. I think there's even more to help build our case now, that I don't want to just accept the current administration is not going to give it to us now, because I think that we have even more data and would request to submit again if that's the response that we ultimately get back.
Thanks. Hi, y'all. I'm David Johnson from 94 Golden Hind. And thank you so much for the time that you guys put into this. It's pretty awesome. As we look towards the past and we hear of the predictions of the future, these events are going to become more often and are going to be more severe than what we just had. So with that in mind, the last time I looked at the budget, the town budget's about $3 million a year for storm management operational expenses, OpEx. There's $100 million of deferred projects that have not been addressed and $29 or $30 million of priority projects. It's just off the top of my mind, so I could be off by a zero. And so some of the strategies that we've built and have been paying for year on year now are being tested in different ways. Is there a plan to evaluate how the strategies that we've been funding to date have been effective or not? Because it's going to be dollars for donuts here. And there's a lot of towns competing for the same funds. The second point is what's called managed retreat or graceful retreat for some of the most expensive real estate to protect going to be part of our plan. And if not now, we should be thinking about it in the future. So thank you.
If I can, I'd like to actually just comment on that, David. So thanks for that question. And I will say, I did want to point out that, the town has invested a lot of money, and this goes back maybe 20, 30 years since those more significant and severe floods. And I think some of the flooding in '82 was a result of also the runoff issues and not having the adequate flood infrastructure to carry the water away in the storm drain system. And please, Chris is going to correct me if I say something wrong here, but the amount of infrastructure, and for those of you who don't know, we have another section of town on the west side of 101 that's also in the floodplain. This is Madera Gardens, this is town parks built in the floodplain. These are all areas of town that were built on the Bay mudflats, essentially. So the amount of money that was invested to actually fix some of those problems where we were having major flooding earlier, decades ago, has worked, I would say. The problem is, you're right, it requires now maintenance and rebuilding. We have a project in our capital plan over the next couple of years. If anybody knows the Shoreward Marsh pump station, the one that basically out in the bay, that blocks if you go on the smart right of way on the trail out there, huge pump station there, it's going to need to be essentially replaced with the pumps out there. So that's $7.5 million right there. In the next few years, we're going to have to spend to replace that. So it is incredibly expensive. I will say the town has, through these master planning efforts and the analyses that we've been doing to make sure that the flood system continues to work, that's best practice. We're continuing to evaluate it. The last one was 2024, so we do have a list of projects. Maybe it's 100 million, maybe it's 90. It's a lot. It's a lot. And so it is something that we're constantly thinking about. How do we fund these projects? And I will say a big part of how we fund them is through that 3/4 cent sales tax measure that was passed by the voters in 2018. So that is great. It's about a little bit over $4 million a year that's coming in just for infrastructure projects. Not just for flood, though, for all infrastructure projects. Something, and this is where I think Nathan's point about these costs of this big project in the future, we're just thinking about now the design and engineering of it. And the cost of that, we were applying for grants, going back to the other commenter, for 1.2 to 1.5 million just to design preliminary, do design, engineering, and permitting. The project itself, we don't have great estimates on, but it's going to be a big number. And I think Nathan's right. If you want to do a berm or a large wall of some sort, that's going to be very large numbers. A berm enhancement project on Marina Village is not going to be as much, but I think is important, and that's what we're focused on now. And so we continue to look at other grants as well. I think we're focused on really harnessing this moment as well to make the case, the best case we can, to all the different funding agencies out there that this is a priority and this should be a focus to really secure additional monies to start this important work. I'll stop there.
Thank you all for holding this town hall. I'm John Miller. I'm at 203 Golden Hind, and I've been there about 14 years. And since I've been there, probably about 3 times a year, I do have flooding that comes from the storm drain in front of my neighbor's house, and it comes up the street and into my garage. And so I want to reiterate that it's not always coming from the bay, that it's coming from the storm drain, and you can just watch it creep up and up and up. Granted, this was all very extreme, but I've seen some improvements, kind of like what you were saying, as you enter Mariner Cove, Prince Royal. They did some drain work that worked really well there, and I'm hoping that you guys are continuing to do that. So I don't know if it's a one-way valve that you could have so the bay water doesn't come up the drain, because frequently I see seawater in my driveway.
Just want to mention, we have been adding check valves over time, and last year we added 3 new ones in the neighborhood. So we're almost at full coverage where, when they're functioning, they should stop the tidal water from coming backwards through the storm system and coming up through the streets. The only problem with them is they're not foolproof. If there's anything gets stuck in them, a lot of times all it takes is like a tennis ball or something, and then the water can get through. So even though we have the neighborhood mostly protected, there are issues.
Is there like in that situation where maybe the check valve isn't working properly, is there a way that people can let Public Works Department or somebody know, like just send an email or something like that?
Yeah.
Maybe it is just like a quick clean out or something.
Absolutely. If there's a check valve and you see water coming reverse up through the storm drains, and it's definitely helpful to let us know, because we only maintain them twice a year, but if we know there's a problem, we can go address it.
Jeffrey Hall. I'm a architect, and I was actually in the flood up to my chest. The property in question that I'm thinking about has about 120 feet of frontage on Corte Madera Creek, which, if you do the math, comes out to about $300,000 to put a berm, or just specifically that property. Now, here's the thing. There's plenty of mud, because it is, in fact, a mud flat. And I can see some kind of public-private partnership where we would just dredge up the mud outside of everybody's place and just put it up on our property. We could make a berm, I'm pretty sure, for a heck of a lot less than $300,000. All we really need is a floating dredge, to come up, and we could berm it all up. That's just a food for thought. A lot of the times, I've been in this business a long time, and a lot of times when we start getting into official this, engineering study that, all of this, if the people just go out with the dredge and stuff, we can contribute our property. We got all the mud we need right there. We're sitting in the middle of it. It shouldn't be too hard. If we really have a community construction where there's a public-private partnership, we could get this done for a heck of a lot less than having to pay $300,000 for our own property. No. Just food for thought. Thank you.
I'll just point out that we have talked about that in the flood control board, about homeowners helping to increase their own berms. And one of the issues with bay mud is the hornet's nest of agencies that you have to get involved with if you touch the bay. I've worked with town, and we've identified 12 to 15 agencies that either have veto ability or review or approval ability for anything that's in the water. So I'm not shelving that idea, but it's extremely hard to get through the red tape to actually touch anything on the bay side of your property line.
Yeah, and it just to build off that, if every homeowner has to go out and get permits to build a berm in their backyard, it ends up being a lot more effort than if the town were to take the initiative. We have to get one set of permits from each permitting agency for the whole thing. So it ends up simplifying it if there's one entity doing the work. But I mean, definitely open to public-private partnerships in any way we can.
Hello, I'm Steve Wilson. I live at the end of Lucky Drive. My main concern is right there on the overpass when you're coming down, there's a big hole, and at 6'2", it starts coming out of there. And that's what starts to flood in the first place out there. And plus the berms haven't been addressed for a long time. So yeah, there's a big hole. You stick a tape right down it. It just keeps on going. And I'm just worried about the cavern that is made underneath the freeway. So.
Are you talking about the on-ramp on southbound
Off-ramp.
101?
The off-ramp.
The off-ramp, okay.
Yeah, right before Lucky Drive.
Yeah.
It comes down to the main highway.
Yeah.
There's a big hole there, and it comes right out the hole.
Yeah.
So I'm worried about the cavern that's underneath it.
Yep, that one's Caltrans, but we all have to work together on solving these things.
Definitely. Right. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jill Hirschleb. I grew up in Mariner Cove and last year moved back. That's my mom right there. Wanted to say thanks to the Flood Board for all the work they've been doing, and also the town representatives for all the work they've been doing and for coming out here asking for feedback. I'm the type of person that likes to think about how to solve problems, what's helpful for next time. And I think in this most recent event, what we were missing was kind of in the moment communication about what was happening and the fact that it was a lot worse than predicted. I think a lot of people, or maybe some people, knew, which is great. I didn't know the difference between predicted tide and actual tide, and it's fascinating, and I know that now. But I think going forward, I love the idea of like a threshold that triggers a communication that goes out to everyone. In a suggested way, maybe a framework to apply to that is to think through what types of information do you want the residents to be fully responsible for knowing and owning and being on top of, versus what type of information do you feel is best coming centralized from the city, and building those plans around that. And I think you'll also have a lot of support. I think it was you who were talking about the ERT team being there while it's happening, helping the residents. I think there's a lot of people, myself included, who would love to participate in something like that next time. So there'll be a lot of support for that. Thank you.
And to that end, some of you may have read, I forgot what local publication it was, but a local paper in the last 2 days published a story about a man who lives in Strawberry who created an app called Flood Route, all one word, and you can get that just on your phone at the App Store. I downloaded it and it looks really good, but he designed it for Marin and it's spread to some other communities around the country. But you download it and specify Marin and it gives you a preview of the week's tides, and then it shows you a map of the roads that will be inundated at certain tide levels. So it's a very good app to plan during this next high tide and during the Christmas high tide I mentioned. I think that's the kind of thing that's very valuable, just to keep people off the roads and out of the salt water when it does come up. But again, it's Flood Route, all one word, and it seems to be a really good app to use.
And I would just say that there have already been discussions. I was on a call yesterday with about, I don't know, there must have been 60 or 70 countywide officials, emergency response communication people with OEM, and we were talking about how we could improve that. I mean, it's true, the National Weather Service's predictions didn't come out till January 1. They were actually lower than we expected. But how to best get messaging from National Weather Service, potentially to OEM, and then make sure that on the ground we're communicating back and forth between our emergency response personnel, our public works, and our communication officials locally at each jurisdiction. And so Mike's here. We've been talking about how best to do that. I think all those suggestions are really helpful to hear. So I just appreciate the commentary there. One of the things that, just as I will just say, like an idea for me, we ran into a problem at least it seemed like it was a problem with, we'd put sandbags out there, we'd put sand out there at the sand stations. It's not clear to us how that was being managed, but we know it was gone pretty quickly. And I think there were some observers that maybe there were other individuals from other locations taking sand elsewhere. Not, you know, I don't, but maybe there's a role there for the neighborhood groups to help sort of more systematically manage that, the sand areas and allow people to take a certain amount, et cetera.
Hi, yeah, my name is Gabriel Underwood, a resident of Mariner Cove. I guess first, just thanks for the outreach and the information. It's very informative. Appreciate the effort. And as a resident of Mariner Cove, very much in favor of investment in physical flood control infrastructure. I guess I did have a technical question and about risk in the near term. So obviously, long term with the subsidence, I think the same size tidal event in 5 years and 10 years is going to have a bigger impact. And that's why I'm in favor of physical flood control measures. In the short term, if we can expect this annually, right, next Christmas, every winter. In the near term, is there a risk of sanitary sewer overflow as part of one of these tidal events? And if so, that should be one of the priorities because the impact of that in the remediation and cleanup is severe.
You may have heard that over at Larkspur Lagoon near Redwood, they did have sewer overflows in that area. They normally drain those lagoons in advance of flooding, and because they were doing construction in the lagoon, the residents didn't want the water dropped down low, exposing the mud. So contrary to what they normally do, they left the water high and it overtopped quickly. So I would call that a mistake, but there was sewage that was released. The towns do not deal with that. It's the Marin Sanitary, the local sanitary service. And so I think there's some coordination issues that need to be worked out to make sure town management in Corte Madera and Larkspur are properly dealing with the Ross Sanitary District as well.
Well, one correction, the town does manage the sanitary district, SD2 in Corte Madera. So, and yeah, just to build off that, there is definitely potential for a sewer spill. We were lucky this time. 3 of our pump stations were actually underwater, but there was no spill during this event. But there's definitely, a possibility the pumps get overwhelmed and then sewer spills out. So,
yeah, I mean, I think from not here, but in past experiences, that preventing that is a definite priority because it really impacts the remediation and cleanup.
Absolutely, and we've been investing a lot in our sewer system as well to beef it up for events like this and inflow.
Is it correct that our sewer gets pumped to San Rafael, like over where San Quentin is? Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, that we have a main pump station on San Clemente, and it's pumped all the way, across Corte Madera Creek, up and over the hill to Central Marin Sanitation Agency.
Hi, Carolyn Phillips. We're just at 211 Golden Hind, and one of the houses that is right at the end of San Clemente Creek, and just wanted to feed in for any future discussions through the waves in this well from the ferries. The point of San Clemente Creek has decreased massively. We've been there for 6 years and is basically gone now. So any storm surges really hit those last 2 or 3 houses. So I think based on what's being discussed, it would be great to sort of look at that because it definitely, of course, this was like a, every 30-year event, but I'm sure it's going to impact those houses and then everyone further down in the creek as well going forward.
I'll just some of the concepts we discussed during the shoreline engagement effort, the climate adaptation assessment also included nature-based strategies where at least, if we can restore some of the wetland environment, that helps to reduce some of the storm surge or wave run up at times where you do have storm surge. It's not going to, eliminate a extreme high tide like we had, but in lesser events or wakes and certain situations like that, it can help stop erosion.
I'll just add that there are tools when you could look at historic marsh locations on Google Earth. You can look at past aerial photos. And I looked at those over 30 or 40 years and just mapped where the shoreline was. And it didn't seem to be storm related, as more of a slow erosion, and it's about a foot a year. So over 40 feet, we've lost 40 feet of marsh, and I don't see any reason why that's going to stop. So I'm really supportive of some of these marsh preservation efforts.
Good evening. My name's Jeff Rabkin, and my wife Adriana and I live at 72 Golden Hind. Thank you for hosting this event tonight. I think it's really important. Before living here, my wife and I lived mostly in cities, in places where you didn't get to know your neighbors and there really wasn't a neighborhood. And the reason we're still here is we love this neighborhood and we love having neighbors. We think this community has a lot of strength. And for that reason, I'm speaking tonight because I wanted to express my sense that we are facing an existential threat as a community, and that despite best efforts, things are moving faster than we are currently handling. We will reach a point of no return when the insurance companies drop coverage in this neighborhood. And I think if insurers were in this room, they'd do it tomorrow. Once houses in this neighborhood become uninsurable, that's it. That's game over for the neighborhood. You can't have a mortgage, and you can't function as a community. So I say that not, I say that in the spirit of encouraging you and everyone in this room to find another gear and recognize that this is an emergency and we do not have 10 years. I haven't seen anything in these slides that suggests that there's going to be any significant changes in the next 10 years. And if that's the truth, then I think we lose. In the short term, and everyone here has my full support and our full support to help you help us. We're in it together. And as I said, there's a lot of strength in this community, but we are not moving fast enough. In the short term, I have a practical suggestion. I am a member of the Marin Search and Rescue Team. And one of the things we do is we sandbag. We have been called out before to sandbag out in Stinson Beach and elsewhere. It is hard work. When I look around this room, I see people who cannot possibly sandbag their house. It is too hard. I can't do it. It is too hard. But guess what? There are 30 teenagers, athletic teenagers, on the search and rescue team that would love nothing else than to ditch school and sandbag your homes. So please, starting tomorrow, call them. I know there's a mutual aid process. Adriana can talk you through it. I can talk you through it. You probably already know about it. But yeah. So you have to go through the county sheriff's office, but the town can contact the sheriff tonight. There can be kids in the neighborhood tomorrow, and they'll thank you because they'd rather be doing that than a school. To that end, search and rescue, yeah, but to be clear, private individuals can't call them. The town has to contact the sheriff. The sheriff has to contact them, but they will come. We're out in the middle of the night. We're out anytime. And look, these are predictable events, right? To some extent, we know when we're going to have high tides. One of the things that I was very disappointed about over the last event was I felt like we could have gotten ahead of it. I felt like we could have gotten sandbags in front of houses. And I know that for the houses near us, if they had sandbags, they wouldn't have had water in their garage. So, let's anticipate that. Let's help each other. If we can't get search and rescue, let's help each other with the sandbags. But let's get those sandbags out in advance, not be reactive. That's my suggestion. Thank you.
I will say I happen to know one of those teenagers on that team as well. So I will call and make sure that countywide that individual will be a Corte Madera supporter.
And Jeff, on your first point of the sort of existential nature of the long-term issue, I've always shared that view, and something I've said at meetings several years ago, but I think is even stronger now, is that there was concern in the past that a levy would negatively impact property values. And I think January 2026, we've reached that inflection point where a levy would positively affect property values. So I think we should look at it like that.
Hi there. My name is Corey Beachy. I live down at the end of Lucky Drive, down by the pedestrian footbridge. And I just wanted to share a little bit of my experience. The flooding came in so fast from the bridge side. It was unbelievable. I mean, we were watching it trickle in over the edge of the property facing Corte Madera Creek, and that was exciting. But when it came in coming the back way, it was a little more alarming. And there wasn't anything we could do. I mean, maybe if you had like a 4-foot wall, it was pretty intimidating. I just wanted to let you know.
Thanks.
My name is Maya. I'm also at 18 Lucky Drive. So I'm at Rancho Shazam. And just wanted to give you some feedback as far as that berm on the corner where the 101 flyover or the Drake flyover is connecting to the 101. That area is very unstable, it seems, at this point. I've been feeling ground, doing all sorts of movements. I've talked to Caltrans and I talked to the Highway Patrol because I was trying to let them know to close down the 101 during the flood because there was so much water. I mean, it was chest deep over there on Lucky Drive. And the way that the draining system works there, the water comes up through the drains. And even if I go there right now, there's water in the drains all the time. And there seems to be some sort of little channel that you guys have that maybe goes to a pump or something, and that it seems like it needs to be dredged out or something, because I know that those drains need to be clear, and they're not clear all the time. There's a lot of trash, a lot of debris that's in them. We try to clear them ourselves. I'm out there all the time trying to do that, but we couldn't stop the mud or any of the debris that was there. But it seems like it's super important because the water got really high there. And anybody that all of the residents lost vehicles, whatnot, and I thank you to the community for people who have donated to that community. But Lee's getting older, so that whole area is gonna probably change. I don't know what's gonna happen yet, but he's not able to get out there and be proactive on his property, so there's other issues. I know that the county needs to be involved, the state needs to be involved, but that area seems to be forgotten. The county, I don't see anything that's on their proposal as far as fixing that area. So I'm like wondering who's gonna do it. And it seems like that would be the area that needs to be really concentrated on because it did close the freeway down, no problem. And that area floods before any of the houses start to flood or it goes over their berms. So that area seems to be, that is bringing the most water. And it's gonna be a big issue, especially with the sinking now that's going on. There's a lot of sinking going on and there's a lot of big holes that are over there all through that, just that whole area. It's not good. I mean, the properties are doing weird things. Our berm is doing weird things. The properties are kind of sinking. So I don't know. I think it's a major importance for this community to come together on this issue. And it's really important, super important. I feel like a lot more is coming if some stuff is not done now. So that's my input.
Yeah, I haven't seen any short-term plans for that area. I do know that the county has published maps that are not true engineering plans, but conceptual plans that would rebuild that berm and connect it to the berms across the freeway on the Cost Plus side. And that area where you're talking about is also in Larkspur city limits, so I would also talk to them about that channel. I think they would be the ones that would have to be responsive to that.
Hi, I'm Adriana Rabkin, partner Jeff Rabkin, not nearly as eloquent as Jeff. I just wanted to touch a little bit on the immediate actions that can be taken for the next big storm and what we can do. For those of you who don't know, I work in the disaster response space. I work with the county in the Emergency Operations Center, helping coordinate in disasters. And Adam, we didn't really get a chance to talk, but I think there's a real opportunity here before the next storm to make sure that the town and Public Works and PD and fire are all in communication. If you need to get search and rescue to help, right, the more collaboration you guys have, the more you can do that as a preparatory step. Public Works, you know, I know this was over a vacation and there was nobody here. I just want to throw out and ask if there's mutual aid with other public works departments, other towns and cities, because, you know, there's mutual aid in fire and police and EMS. You know, it's an opportunity if we know that we're going to get hit hard in Corte Madera to make sure that we're staffed up elsewhere. There's also collaboration opportunities with the neighborhood response group. This is not where they've typically been in the past. They respond to earthquakes. Sachi, you know I'm going to talk to you about this. It's specifically about this. There are opportunities. I think we all need to shoulder this together at the same time, and I am one who is signed up for all alerts. I encourage everybody in this room to make sure you're signed up for both Alert Marin and Nixle, but it's also the responsibility of the town and everybody who knows that these tides are coming to make sure that those people who are not signed up, or my neighbors who just had a new baby yesterday, didn't get the sandbags, couldn't think about it, right? That we're all helping. And that means more sandwich boards earlier, not the day after the massive king tide. It means, you know, more sand and more sandbagging opportunities, getting people in there, like the teens in search and rescue who can do it for our neighbors. It means our neighborhood response group checking in on people beforehand, during and after, but and messaging. The alerts need to go out earlier, and I know it's PD that it's issuing the alerts, but if we are coordinated as a community and all checking in with each other before these things happen, we can make sure that everybody in the neighborhood knows what to do. Thanks.
I would like to just respond to one point on that. We actually did have almost our full staff, or a significant number of our public works maintenance staff all called in. So we were not understaffed. We just were in a variety of places, both on the Lucky, I mean, it was just too massive of an event to be everywhere all at once. So, and obviously one of the most significant things they were all doing was just making sure the pumps were all running. And how many pumps do we have, both on sanitary plus flood? It's like, I think it's 30 to 40 pump stations, so around town, and delivering the sand and so forth. And we do have, I think the good thing is we do have on-call long-standing relationship with a contractor who provides additional manpower for maintenance team. And so they were called in and were there right away, and they're out of San Rafael.
Good evening. My name's Roy Wolford, and I want to address potential solutions. I'd like to have the board and the town, the staff, I'd like to have the board, town, and staff take a look at them, and they're from the big to the small solutions, both in terms of implementing it, cost, and that sort of thing. So there's the subdivision berm. So we've got the two subdivisions. Put a berm on the north and the east side, completely surround it with a pumping gate, and that's a very expensive solution, long term. Block level berming, guppy tubing, aqua dam, flood panels, 24 to 36 inches, quick dam tubes, threshold seals, and sandbags. And I can tell you, I had the sandbags in front of our garage, and they don't work very well. You got to really pack them in and that sort of thing. The thing that did work the best, and this was on the 4th, I put the sandbags away from the garage, packed them in tight, got a sump pump, and pumped the water that leaked through the sandbags out. So that was effective. I would also like to see a list of kind of common sense things to do. So we know that typically our garages, if we're flooding, will get flooded. Raise everything you have in there at least 2 feet. If you don't care about cardboard and cloth, then keep them stored low. Where you have electrical equipment, put them on separate circuit breakers. So you have refrigerators, that sort of thing. Put them up on stands if you can, but turn the circuit breakers off if you think you're going to flood. I have a couple of sump pumps. We were completely inundated. It's 37 Seawolf Passage. So all they're going to be doing is pumping water around and around. So turn your pumps off. I think the town does that too. It sounded like that was a practice. It's great because it doesn't do any good other than run up the electric bill. So I also want to thank clarifying what the true root cause of what is hitting us here, because now we know what to focus in on. It's building the berms, trying to keep the floodwaters out. Thank you.
I wanted to add one thing there as well. One of the purposes of actually going through the design and studies and the engineering work is that you actually get to explore different alternatives, and that's the point at which we would actually be able to study and analyze those, the different impacts that each of those would actually have on flood protection, but also the environment, et cetera, et cetera. So.
Hi, my name's Sean. I live at 23 Harbor Drive. I just wanted to give a characterization to what this looks like recovering as a homeowner when this happens, because I know it's the first time it's ever happened to me, and it may not have happened to many people who are here in the community. And it's a pretty long process to recover from. So for us, we have things like going from the back of the property to the front. Along the back of our property, all the fence along the property line was basically pushed out of the ground by the force of the water. So we probably have to get that replaced. Of course, all the dirt in the backyard got moved around. Going along the side of the house, we had a river. So all of our wood siding up about 2 feet, 3 feet got soaked and may need to be replaced. And we kind of had a river going through our garage as well, and need about like 4 feet up from the ground of drywall replaced in there as well. Under the house, we had to get our vapor barrier replaced. After that was taken out and all of our HVAC ducting was taken out, it's taken about 2 weeks to dry out the underside of the house. And during those 2 weeks, we didn't have any heater because that's where our heater ducts were running. So luckily for us, our neighbors we love our neighbors, and they're very nice, and they give us some space heaters. So yeah, no heat for 2 weeks. If you have an AC unit or a heat pump outside, if the water gets in it, you might have to have that replaced. If more houses in your neighborhood are flooded, it's going to be harder for you to get someone to come by your house to fix your things because there's just not that many people around that can do this kind of work. So you might have more risk for getting mold in your house. We have some pumps that broke underneath our house. And the other thing I'm a little bit concerned about as well is that I know that this is an event that doesn't happen very often with these tides, and that we expect that the berm would be flooded after, the tide gets about 7 feet. But I'd also like the town to consider that when these floods happen and they go over the berm, it has the potential of weakening the berm and lowering the berm as well. And that could make the flooding happen more often as well. So that's all. I just wanted to give some characterization to what it might be like to go through one of these recovery processes. Thanks.
I'm Manny Albato. I live at 283 Golden Hind. We're no stranger to flooding during most king tides. A couple things we saw. One, first, actually, thank you for putting this on. This is fantastic to have everybody come out and see. Second, initially we saw the fire department come out, close the road, which was really fantastic, really professional. They spoke with neighbors, got an idea for where the flooding was going to come up to, put out signs, put out caution tape, and then like 20 minutes later, Public Works took it all down. And so it was kind of a back and forth there. But But then my other thing is I in my backyard, I do have a levee that covers 3/4 of the backyard, and it didn't overtop. It runs maybe 9.4 mean sea level. And I know this last tide was somewhere around 8.4 or so. One of the suggestions I'd have for the town is to basically make the permit process easier, to basically like do things like complete the levee for the community. If the process is easier to do work in your backyard, and I know there's kind of a state regulation with the BCDC that's a challenge, I think a lot more will get done, and a lot more people kind of take the initiative up front to do some work.
I appreciate that. And I do think one of the things that I would love to get out of this meeting, it's up on the screen. We have put out a request for letting us know what actually happened on your property. The more information we can bring and as a town have in our back pocket when we go and talk to agencies about what's really happening and the issues, the better success we think we'll have in convincing them, whether it's a permit process. I mean, the challenge with that, it's not just a Corte Madera issue. I think as a region, we really need to work regionally to talk to agencies about some of the real world effects the permitting process may be having on simple, we've heard the idea of some simple fixes potentially. But I think information is really critical. And so this event, we should not let it, I don't want to say, I mean, I know it's impacting real lives here, and it's more than, it's a lot of, more than just getting the information, but I do think it's really helpful and key for us going forward. So if you can do that, that'd be great. There's and to that, there's this map over here about where the water's coming in.
Good evening. Good evening. My name is Arlene Johnstone. My husband and I live at, we live at 18 Golden Hind, and I just want to make a couple comments. We lucked out. The water got up to our garage, but something we did notice, and I really appreciated that you put up there that you were going to put up roadblocks. I think that was really important because we were out in the street and there were people driving up and down the street, even at the highest tide, which was really frustrating because there are neighbors that are not as lucky as us, they're lower. And it made the difference between the water going over their sandbags and even going into their houses just with the wake. And I did see that on national television too, that there was trucks driving up and down. And we could not get people to stop. Some were neighbors. I understand, some people were trying to get to their family, fair enough. But there were some looky-loos, and I remember experiencing this with the earthquake in San Francisco, the frustration with people just coming because they're curious. So I did call the police that day and said, can you please block our road? But apparently we weren't the big deal. So thank you for that. The other is I really believe the levee is the answer. We've been talking about this for a long time. Do we raise our house? But the point really is what's coming. We've been reading, and I don't know if you've all seen this, but the USGS predictions that in the 2030s, they said it's not so much that the tides will be a lot higher, but that they'll last longer. And I feel like this is just a taste of what's to come. And it won't subside, according to this, in 4 hours. They're talking about this lasting for a week long, and that will change our entire neighborhoods. And we might as well put up houseboats because, we've had a lot of neighbors say, well, we'll just park up the hill. But what are you going to do in the meantime? Because we won't be able to get in and out of the neighborhoods. So thank you all. We really appreciate you having this. We really love this neighborhood, and we don't want to have to move because, things are not looking positive.
Hi, I live at 287 Golden Hind. I know several of you personally, but I would just echo the importance of road closures and effective road closures. A singular sandwich board sign is driven around 90%, an exaggeration, significantly often. This time it was closed with caution tape. That worked. It wasn't closed until the second or third day of the flood. I know that in the past, Sachi, I know you've spoken about adding signs at people's houses to be put up. I know that our house has water in the garage before most of the other houses in the neighborhood and after most of the houses in the neighborhood. Signs of, even during this, are taken down while water is still in our garage. My dad has my whole life stood in the road and tried to block cars to some extent, leading to altercations, which I don't think are great to have. But I think the solution to that is to build systems that don't provide that opportunity for altercations with either members of the city, the incident that Manny echoed earlier. And I think as we speak about like trigger points for town response, I would say early, often, and in excess, a lower number perhaps for beginnings of road closures, and for those road closures to stay up for a long time. For example, I think even this weekend, I don't know if that's triggering anything, but I know that we have a good estimation that water will be touching our side of our house, I think Sastri's house as well. And so I just encourage that to happen early, often, and to build sort of long-term goodwill as we move into bigger problems, as we wait funding. I work in grant writing, and share your frustrations with the way that that is up in the air due to systems. But yeah.
I'll be super quick, everybody. Susie Beatty, I know a bunch of you here. I'm on Key Largo course. I just wanted to do a couple of points. I want to just confirm my observation of the subsidence issue. And that's because I've been in this house that I'm in now since 1976. So I've witnessed virtually all the flooding that we've been talking about here lately anyway. There's a pool in the backyard. The pool was there when we moved into the house. There's the house, and there's the pool, and there's the creek. So virtually you could see, and the pool had not ever flooded before, except maybe this much over the combing. This time there was 1.5 feet of water which came from the creek into the pool. And that's all muddy, dirty water, you know. But it did not come from the rain coming down from the top or from flooding from elsewhere. It was that area has sunk, and that's what's happened there. The other thing I was going to mention, and I've talked to actually Bob about this, but I thought it would be a perfect time to bring up a thought about signage. In the other side of Corte Madera, at the community center, there is a great sign. It's a electronic sign. They're able to put different messages on the sign. It rotates. And I really think that the east side needs a sign similar to that, because that sign could be used for things that were just happening like this. And you could use that sign. We would be made aware of what's going on. They could say sandbags are going to be here at 10 o'clock, or sandbags are gone, or whatever. So that's my idea, and I will bring it to Adam officially, and maybe the town council, because it seems very doable to me. It was discussed at one time before, and somebody thought it just wouldn't look so great. Well, I think we can make it look fine, and it would be a nice awareness for everybody to be able to use. Thanks.
Do we have any other speakers besides? I
Ray
think
Sheridan, 34 Golden Hind Passage. Been there for 49 years. During the 1980 floods and 83 floods, a number of resolutions or remedies to the problem of flooding were identified, and also some impediments to those remedies, including the berm. Those often involved, as was mentioned earlier by Nathan, political problems with various different agencies, BCDC, the Coast Guard. Has the town developed a strategy for dealing with some of these impediments? is Corte Madera or San Clemente Creek still considered a navigable waterway that cannot be burned? Are we dealing with those agencies to try to, in light of the current issues, to maybe push them? And is there anything that we as residents might be able to do to grease the pathway? I know BCDC, when I talked to them way back in the 80s, basically said, you can't do anything. We're in control of wherever the water flows. So I would hope that the town would develop some strategy for dealing with that and maybe talk to our political representatives to see if they can help grease the pathway for funding. Thank you. Thank you also for all of your attention and all the work you do and for what you've done for this town already. It's really quite impressive. Thank you.
I don't know if you or anyone else wants to address the any talks you've had with those agencies. I think some of it's been jointly done with the county and Larkspur.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those discussions are part of the design process when you go through the environmental review. And there's, I will just say over time, it's gotten more and more burdensome to get these permits. They require a bunch of extra mitigation, which adds cost, and it literally takes years to get through the permitting process. So it's a lot of work. And so once I think, you know, for any of these plans, you know, once we have funding, we get into design, that's when we start talking, looking at alternatives and just figuring out what we can and can't do.
And just to wrap up on that, I want to talk about next steps real quick because one, just in terms of what Chris was saying, we do have some funding. Our immediate plans are to start topographic survey work over the next few months. The complication, and even that step is complicated. If we're going to do a topographic survey of a berm, for example, it's not town property. This berm goes out into the wetlands in the marsh. It's California Fish and Wildlife. There's some berms in the back of people's yards. You have to talk to all of the neighbors and gain access to do that work. That's our immediate plan while we aggressively pursue some of the other funding sources and grants. I know we're talking to the Coastal Commission, Conservancy. Phoebe, do you want to talk a little bit about the grants? Nobody want to hear about it? We don't have to talk about it. That's fine. But anyways, we're aggressively pursuing those. We still think that is a worthwhile endeavor. But certainly we're going to put, at some point, we have to put a stop to, you know, to that and consider whether we just start the process ourselves. Is there any other, do you want to?
Already spoke, but what would it take to raise a red flag over the situation? Because there were two other things really that I wanted to say. And one was, I think you've got a group of people here that are willing to do just about anything to help. But the emergency status of it that Mr. Rabkin was talking about, and I think that if there's some way, the agencies are impossible to deal with. I know, it's awful.
Well, yeah, there's two different issues. I don't think there's an emergency response effort, which I think we can work on, and we're going to start working on sort of the playbook of how we're better prepared for another tidal event over 8 feet or whatever the threshold is, and even some other things we can do, maybe lower tides. But that's different than actually the long-term solution and planning for how we're going to actually allow for construction of physical flood protection and barriers there. I don't know if you have the flood board has any final thoughts before we wrap up tonight.
I'd just like on behalf of the flood board to say thank you to all of you for being here. All of us are Corte Madera residents, all of us are volunteers, none of us work for the town. We're all here to be the voice of the town or the voice of the community to the town. So I encourage all of you to stay involved in this issue. The flood board meets usually 6 times a year, every other month on a Monday. I think the next meeting's February 9th. It's not uncommon for all of us to be there with the town and have nobody from town at those meetings. So I encourage you to stay on top of these issues and join those meetings, and so we can work collaboratively. I think we're very fortunate to have the partners we do in this town and the civil engagement that we have, so I think we just need to keep moving that forward. There's some big challenges, and we just need to look at the short-term fixes for the next flood and the long-term fixes that are going to protect this community for a long time. If you go to the town website, you can get to the flood control site, and it gives you all the meetings for the year. It also gives you all of the past meetings, their agendas, and their videos, so you can see the past meetings.
And I would encourage you, we have some QR codes here. On the right-hand side is our Corte Madera DAPS web page and website that shows all of the work in terms of that we've done in the shoreline engagement effort. A lot of great information on that site. And on the left-hand side is a more recent web page that was put together to really provide some additional resources, sign up for Nixle, alert Marin, do all of those things. I will say, as far as, I think it's a good opportunity this weekend. It's a 6.8, maybe a 6.9 tide event. We did get briefed by the National Weather Service today, along with the rest of Marin County. It is not expected to be more than that. There's no storm surge event. And so look at the comparison, because that's the normal. We see the 6.8, 6.9s frequently throughout the year, right? Throughout most of the time in the winter months. But compare this tide to what we saw in early January. I think it's a good way to sort of see the difference and start to gauge when to get concerned, when not to. And we're going to help with that, of course, as well, and start thinking about if we can do better communication on that front. So I want to thank, on behalf of town staff, all of you for coming out. It was a great turnout tonight, and really appreciate the thoughtful engagement, the input, and the feedback tonight. Thank the Flood Board as well. Really great meeting, and look forward to seeing you all again soon.